Connor in southeastern Ohio. You're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Connor.
I just have a question. I live right on the border of Ohio and West Virginia, and of course, West Virginia has the mask mandate right now. And there's a lot of people going to the stores and arguing about constitutional freedom of wearing masks. And I've obviously never heard of anything about masks in the Constitution, and I just wanted to know, what would you argue for or against?
So the idea that you have a constitutional freedom not to wear a mask in the middle of a public health crisis is pretty weak. States have a lot of public health power. They do. Under the state constitutions, they have the ability to do all sorts of stuff to restrict your freedoms in the case of external threat. This is why in times of war, the federal government has the power to basically, take over businesses and do all sorts of stuff that we would never normally give the go-ahead to. Local health authorities do indeed have the constitutional authority to say things like, you need to wear a mask or you'll get fined, in the same way that they have the authority to have a seatbelt rule, right? You got to wear a seatbelt or you'll be fined. Now, you may disagree with both. You may think on a libertarian level, you got to protect yourself. We can rely on social institutions to implement that. On a legal level, it would be very difficult to challenge in court the idea that a local authority can't tell you to wear a mask in public, unless it were clearly unreasonable, right? If the rule were you need to wear a mask 100 feet away from others in a public area, then you got fined for that, it'd be difficult to uphold that in a court of law. But barring that, the idea that you go to a Target and now you have to wear a mask, that is some sort of violation of the government's role. Not a lot of support for that. And that really, as you say, is not really even an argument as to whether the masks are a good idea or a bad idea. And I think the evidence so far has been relatively mixed on masks. I mean, I've seen some studies that suggest, up till 2017, by the way, this was the position of the CDC, is that masks were not particularly effective in terms of transmission of things like flu. And then you've seen some other studies that have said that masks have helped slow the spread in a lot of areas because they at least reduce the risk of droplets escaping the mask on the way out, even though they don't stop tiny, tiny particles from getting into the mask. Yeah, I think that, bottom line in the end, my feeling is that all we can really do is just protect people who are the most vulnerable by telling them to stay home and stay out of public areas. And other than that, I'm really not sure that you can do much more than that. Unless you were talking about, one of the things people are trying to do, and this is getting into the broader COVID topic, Connor, one of the things that people are trying to do is compare countries where they had very, very low caseload at the very beginning to countries that had very high caseload almost nearly from the start. Right? The United States, by the time we even identified this thing, it wasn't like it started with one case. It was like it was seeded everywhere, right? It was seeded in New York. It was seeded in California. It was seeded in Texas. It was seeded nearly everywhere. And that was just not the case in places like South Korea or Hong Kong or Taiwan, where there are a couple of cases, they picked it up incredibly fast because they're used to this sort of thing because of SARS. And then they were able to lock things down pretty quickly until they crushed the curve. The United States didn't have the ability to do that. It was already too prevalent. And so you end up with the thing, with community spread. It's hard to see how in a United States that has literally millions of active cases at this point, you don't stop that community spread is somehow prevented by mask wearing. At best, you might be able to slow transmission to the point where it doesn't overwhelm the hospital system. And I guess that's the idea.
Yeah, all right. I completely agree. I'm a server, so masks are mandatory for us at this point. So
yeah, and again, I that makes some sense. And by the way, I think that it's actually a good business practice. I like the fact that the servers are wearing masks. It makes me more comfortable because I would not be super comfortable with somebody breathing on the food just about to hand it to me. So that makes some sense to me just as a voluntary business practice.
Exactly. And I work at Roadhouse, and we've actually made patios for people to sit outside if they're uncomfortable sitting inside. So
That's great.
Get
That's great. I mean, again, I think the businesses are adapting to this sort of thing, and I think that's a very good thing. And I think that as businesses adapt, we should, I've said all along, I think that you can trust the American people not to be complete idiots. Some Americans will try to prove me wrong, but I think that most Americans are not being complete idiots about this thing. And you can see this in the behavior. The truth is that the stay-at-home orders, those are actually late on the game. If you look at the records of how people traveled and how people moved, people had stopped traveling and moving pretty quickly as soon as they found out about this thing. Like, I know that my family, we basically started locking down, like, I believe the date was March 11th. The actual formal lockdown order in Los Angeles didn't come until the following week. So I think most Americans sort of did the same thing. Connor, I really appreciate the call. Frankie in Detroit, Michigan, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Frankie.
I had a quick question that kind of has to do with stuff you're talking about in your book. First, what can the average American do to defend against the U.S. against disintegrationists? And kind of following up on that really quickly, you tweeted recently that if Biden wins, he'll see it as an endorsement by the American people of an ambitious revisionist agenda, in which case Americans will just snap back and vote him out. So is it the case that the Americans do need to push back against disintegrationists, or Americans will just naturally snap back against a revisionist agenda?
So I think that there will be both. So there will be a natural snapback because this is so radical. But the problem is that every time the radicals pull, if they're trying to pull you all the way to a 10 and they only accomplish pulling America over to a 1 toward their side, that's a win for them, right? Just standing in place. William F. Buckley once famously stated that conservatism was the job of standing athwart history yelling stop, right? But if the train's coming down the track, even if you're Superman and you stop the train, you'll skid back a couple of feet. And that skid back a couple of feet is worth a lot for the left, because if they keep doing it over and over and over, if they keep pile driving Americans over to the left, they don't have to do it all at once. They can do it incrementally. And they know this, right? They push for everything at once just so they can get an incremental sort of victory. It's like your kids. When your kids fuss and they scream and they cry and they scream, they're looking for you to compromise just a little bit, right? Because they'll fuss, they'll bring the fussing up to a 10 just to get 1 out of you. And that's sort of what the left does. What that means is that the snapback needs not just to be, we're going to not give you virtually anything that you want. It's got to be, we need to remake a lot of the major institutions in American society, including our education system, which is busily teaching kids that America's a terrible place. We need to rethink how we do colleges in this country. We need to rethink how we hire people out of college in this country. Like I've suggested for a long time, there needs to be some sort of institution that basically sorts people by intellectual ability, right? That's what colleges effectively do, but does not require you to go through 4 years of indoctrination to get a job. Right? You should be able to take the SAT, and then you should be able to get an apprenticeship with a business. And you don't have to go through all the indoctrinating nonsense that you get at colleges and universities. I saw a poll today, by the way, of Harvard faculty. It showed 80% considered themselves liberal, 19% considered themselves moderate, 1% considered themselves conservative. What do you think kids are going to think coming out of college? None of this is a shock. So what can we do to fight disintegrationism? We can fight in the culture to retake instruments of culture and provide competing avenues in the culture, not just win elections or wait for the snapback. Frankie, appreciate the call. All righty. Tamara in Ohio, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Tamara.
I lost my job and I had been applying for unemployment. I got a stimulus check. But I was just wondering, where exactly is this money coming from? I got way more than I expected. And I know that there are a lot of people who are working right now making less than that. So my question basically was just, how is this going to affect the economy? And are people going to have to pay this money back when tax season comes around next year?
So the answer is probably people will have to pay some money back when the taxes come around next year, especially if Joe Biden is elected, God forbid. This is basically being borrowed from the future, because the fact is that no matter how high you raise taxes next year, there just isn't the money to pay back the several trillion dollars that we just spent over the course of the last 3 months, and probably will be extended. I think there will probably be another round of this, considering the high levels of unemployment and the continued prevalence of COVID. So we're just racking up the debt at this point. Now, the fact is that because we are still the world's strongest horse in terms of the economy, we should be able to continue borrowing, but there will be consequences down the line. Like right now, people are buying American bonds because it's not like there's tons of other places to buy. But down the line, if the American economy starts to shrink in real measures, not just because of COVID, down the line, if we raise taxes and the economy starts to fall apart, then you'll start to see America have to inflate the dollar or raise taxes to exorbitant levels. So do I think it'll happen next year? I think there'll be some tax increases next year. I think the biggest tax increases are going to come over the next 5 years. I think you're going to see it on the state and local level first. I think you'll see it on the federal level as well, but it'll be mostly at the top marginal tax bracket. I think in California, they're just going to go for broke. I think in California, over the next 5 years, considering all the debt they've been incurring, I think you're going to see the rates in California, the income tax rates in California. To give an example, because I know the income tax rates in California because I literally weep over them each and every year. The income rate in California, the top tax rate in California is 12.3%, which is the highest state income tax rate in America. I believe within 5 years that number will be closer to 20. The base sales tax rate in California is 7.25%, which is also the highest. I think that will look more like 10%. And I think that you're going to see this happen all over America. I think that you're right. I mean, listen, at a certain point, you can't pay all these bills. You can't. And it's particularly true at the state level. At the federal level, you can take out debt. At the state level, you really have no capacity to run a deficit forever. You can't declare bankruptcy, obviously, and you can't print your dollars out of it.
Oh, well, thank you so much for answering my question.
I appreciate it, Tamara. Sam in Santa Rosa, California. You're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Sam.
Hey, Ben. So I rewatched I watched the Sunday special that you released with the Intellectual Dark Web Best of. I was watching, and I was wondering, two competing principles seems like they could come up if you are, so you have the principle that you're driven by data, but you also have morals in general, like free markets are good and you should have the right to do what you want with your business. So let's say that evidence started piling up, which I don't think it is, but let's say that it did start piling up that, minimum wage increases have all the benefits that its proponents say, or increasing regulation, increases prosperity, blah, blah, blah. Which principle would you stick with? The evidence that it helped the economy or that it's good for free markets?
The answer is that it's good for free markets. The reason being that my pure vision of government is that you have rights that pre-exist government. Those rights include your ability to dispense with your own labor and to hire people through voluntary contract. And so the idea that you're going to trump that with economic efficiency, there's no limiting principle there. Right? This actually came up in a Supreme Court case. There's a very famous Supreme Court case called Kelo, in which the Supreme Court basically declared that a state could use eminent domain in order to confiscate a property from one private owner and hand it to another private owner to create more tax revenue. So they could come to your house. Normally, the way that it works is the government wants to build a road, right? They come to your house, they confiscate your house, they pay you for your house, and then they pave your house, right? Because they're building a government road. That's eminent domain. Okay, in this case, the government wanted to seize somebody's house and build and literally take the territory and hand it to like Marriott to build a hotel, to another private property. Literally take your property and hand it to me because I'm building a Marriott, whereas you have a house, and the tax revenue back to the state is higher. And the Supreme Court said, oh yeah, this is totally fine. It's for public use. Okay, now that's not public use in my opinion. That's a violation of the rights of the homeowner. And sure, you'd be creating more tax revenue and more economic activity, but you don't have the right to abuse eminent domain in order to confiscate property from one person and give it to another. It's a violation of rights. I feel the same way about minimum wage. Minimum wage, it just so happens that minimum wage actually kills employment. But if minimum wage did not kill employment, I still do not believe the government has the right to dictate to you how to pay people or what people are allowed to take or whom to hire or whom to fire. I think those are all aspects of freedom. And that goes back to fundamental vision of government, which again is about the chief threats to people and human nature. And to me, the greatest threat is people who believe they are the most brilliant thinkers and the most imaginative policymakers having complete control of your life to do what's best for you. And that scares the living hell out of me, as I think it should every sane and rational human being. Sam, appreciate the call.